Welcome to The Writer's Dream. The Writer's Dream is now zooming along, and we're still doing our authors and our readers. The Writer's Dream can be found on Facebook. The page is called The Writer's Dream. We are also on YouTube. You have to search my name, Linda Maria Frank. Click on my picture and then look at all the videos. We have about 200 interviews now. And if you are interested in reading or writing, you'll get a lot of good tips on good books, and also find out about the writing process, the publishing process, and the marketing process. So I encourage you to watch The Writer's Dream. We're also on Cablevision. We're on Cablevision Channel 20 on Long Island at 3 o'clock on Thursday. So today's guest is Vincent Casale. And he's retired from the New York City Police Department, and he has become a writer. He has moved away from New York into Florida, and I just don't understand that. But anyway, I was looking at your Authors Central page on Amazon. You have really been busy writing big, huge leaps from the first book. So, hi, Vincent. Come on in.
Hi, Linda, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
And again, I thank you because I think this is the third appearance on your show for me.
It is.
And, you know, you've been very cordial in allowing me to come on, so I appreciate that.
Well, you know, you're interesting because were you a police officer or what?
I was a policeman in New York City, yes.
Okay. All right. So then you went from that to writing. And your first book was fiction. I'm sorry, nonfiction, right?
Yes.
The Paparazzi.
Yes.
And I'm going to give you a chance to summarize your books, but you went from nonfiction, and then you moved into a self-help book about divorce.
Right.
And then you have a book on poetry.
Yes.
And then a novel.
Yes.
The latest endeavor is a novel. So you want to just give us a little bit of a summary of that journey?
Well, I when I was very young, as you know from my first book, I wanted to be an actor. Actually,
Hey.
I attended a couple of the acting schools in New York City, and then when I got to be into my mid-20s, I realized I didn't want to star for my art. So a friend of mine suggested I take the policeman's test, which I did. I was called a year later. And that was a wonderful journey for 20 years. And but I also wrote, and I, as a writer, I'm sure other writers could relate to this. I always kept it a secret for some reason, you know, because you know how people are sometimes. What are you doing? Blah blah blah. And so I would write notes though, and I would keep small journals. And that's so when I decided to write my books, I could reflect back from not only from research but from memory. And so my first book, The Paparazzi, excuse me, that's a memoir, and that details the 3 years I spent in what's the New York City Police Department's movie and television unit. Our duties there were to protect the integrity of the motion picture and television industries when they filmed on the streets of New York. Mostly the problem was with Manhattan's crazy traffic, as you can imagine. Bumper to bumper in New York is no joke, especially when they're trying to navigate around a movie set.
Yes.
But I also, the pleasure of that unit was I got to meet and take photos with hundreds of celebrities of the time from 1989 to 1992. So that's the Paparazzi as opposed to the Paparazzi. And that's where I came up with the title. My next book, as you also know, was also not nonfiction, but like an educational tome about divorce. It's called The Casualties of Divorce. I was one of 3 authors on that with a fellow police officer and a family psychologist from Long Island. We interviewed about 25 to 30 divorced men from all walks of life. So it's not just about policemen. And what we did was, instead of a generic educational book, we made a composite of 2 or 3 characters from all the interviews and what they had in common, and you know, and we just wanted to show that men also suffer profoundly from divorce. I mean, in the first chapter, the man is left by his wife. In the second one, the man leaves his wife. But the point is, they both arrive at the same painful conclusion, with unending court appearances, issues with children, contention with the former spouse after long and lifetime of unfulfilled promises. The third section that was written by the doctor, he goes into the woman's side of it as well, and the children's side, and leaves a vast array of information on where these people could find help for their issues. So the third book,
Tell me about poetry.
That the third book was my stab at poetry. It's called 40 Octobers, and it's written in verse libre, which simply means poetry without the rhymes, without the nursery rhymes. So it's just thoughts and ideas from the time that I was a child to up until the time I was 40 years old. I had written that book, but then I decided to edit it and then publish it. And my thoughts and experiences range, like I said, from childhood to age 40, which was a long time ago. And so I like it. I mean, I was never a big poetry fan, but in my later years, I started reading Robert Bly and getting into a little more of that, because it has a lot of meaning. There's a lot of good stuff in it. Not my book, but just poetry in general.
Yeah.
And so that's why I did that. It's only about 80 pages long, but I'm happy that I did it. And so, which leads us to the reason why we're here. My final book, Beat Cop 1980, C-Pop 1986. I originally wrote it to be a Pulp Fiction novel, even with shock value. I figured that might sell, and
I know.
So I mean, a lot of people who have read it told me already, oh my God, where'd you get all those thoughts? And it's really simply, when you're a policeman for 20 years, you not only see, you hear, and you experience many things. So with a novel of that sort, people will ask, is it you? Is it a friend of yours? Is you know the deal with
sure.
that. And
they always ask if it's you.
It's not. I mean, of course, there's elements. And you hear it from every writer, even dating back centuries. There's always going to be an element of you, because that's what you're
writing the book.
Because you're writing a book and your thoughts are in it, and you write what you know. So, but people might be shocked about it, because it's not your average cops and robbers chasing, or a detective novel to solve the crime by the end of the book. It's really a year in the life of about a half a dozen young policemen and women. And so there's no, I liken it to the Seinfeld. When you remember when Seinfeld used to say, my show is about nothing. And my book is not that it's about nothing, but there's no prequel to their lives. There's no, at the end of the year.
It's a year in the life.
It's a year in the life and their experiences and what they've been through.
Okay, so could we stop right here?
Of course, I'm talking.
You know why? Because we never told them what the title of the book is.
I thought I did. Oh, I'm sorry. It's called Beat Cop, subtitle C-Pop 1986.
And that's significant.
That's significant because in 1986 is when then former Mayor Ed Koch implemented the C-Pop units to get closer to the communities. So he put policemen back on the beat, so to speak, walking door to door, store to store. And his intention was to form a relationship with the community, the store owners. We would have monthly meetings with the people, the community people that were in charge. I don't know how. I'm gonna guess it was partially successful, but it's interesting to note that the original policy is so warranted in today's America.
Oh, this is a very timely book.
I mean, police and communities, after the 30 years of implementing these things, are still at odds, and it doesn't look like there's any end in sight. So it does appear that the clock has turned back. But that said, it's really a photo play of sorts, a snapshot of a year in the life of these young policemen and women newly assigned to these community policing units. You know, and a lot of policemen at the time, they came from their white picket fence landscapes of upper New York and eastern Long Island. And now they had to go to the main arena where the so-called mosaic minefields of New York City's inner neighborhoods was something they weren't used to. I describe how they endure their trials, their confusions, and even their hedonistic lifestyles to deal with whatever problems they endure, both professionally and personally. And they have, like I said, I'm sorry.
It's really a novel. I mean, you've given us the setting and the plot, but tell us about the characters.
Okay, the characters, there's two main characters. The first character is a male character in his 20s. And so he's a little bit of a veteran. He's already got 4 or 5 years on the police force. And he just from day one hooks up with a bunch of buddies, and their whole lifestyle is what they used to call, well, his buddies especially, they used to call it the blue magnet back in the 80s, when people loved cops, especially females. And so the presentation for a young guy was, I'm the blue magnet. You know, you could say and be friendly to anyone you want on the street, and if you got reception, you got reception. If you didn't, you didn't. But he happens to get married, but still wants to live his lifestyle with his buddies. So in turn, that creates major crisis in his marriage. So he plays with these difficulties in his head. You know, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? And ultimately, he does a couple of wrong things, which leads to, again, disaster with his spouse. The other fellas, his friends, they don't have wives, so they, well, one does, but that's a separate fellow who goes through extremely mental distress over 2 divorces. But these main fellas, they just want to, you know, they do their job, you know, they diligently do their job, but it's not their main focus. Their main focus is their newfound freedom, the nightlife, the hours that they do entitles them to go out 7 nights a week if they want. So the main character, Frank, is always, throughout the year, he's always on the fence. The second character is a young woman. And a lot of people, again, a couple of people that have read the book were shocked by what happens to her. But again, when you're a writer, you have to implement some imagination and some exaggeration and some, you know, you have to embellish to make the story a little more crazy or whatever. And she's
Attractive.
a young woman. Effective?
Attractive.
Yeah, and she's a young, average-looking woman, but the type you would bring home to mom and dad. And even her counterparts are party girls. And so the whole scene is young people from all walks getting together, meeting each other, finding their new families, really, because it is a family. And but she is a young woman who led an average life. Her mom and dad wanted her to be a school teacher or a lawyer. Lastly, a policewoman. And she goes through a brutal attack. You know, and I'll leave it there. She gets brutally attacked, and in the year of her life, she is struggling. You know, to get her mind back. And then what happens is she meets Frank, the main character, in the course of their duties. He's assigned, because she lives on his beat, he's assigned to go and protect her or do errands for her or whatever it is. And they form a somewhat of a relationship. And intermingling with all of that are, of course, a few police stories, you know, people, you know, crimes. Brutal crimes, actually anywhere from brutal crimes to scam crimes. The location where these police officers work is in a high Asian community in Flushing, New York, and the Asians, even back in the 80s, were really taken advantage of.
So this book is really timely because it's dealing with the problems Asians had. It's talking about the relationship between the police and the community.
Right.
I'm going to give you a tip that was given to me by someone who was involved in getting articles into newspapers and magazines. And what she said was that if you can connect your writing, your book, whatever, to what's going on in the news, this is a wonderful way to promote the book. So in whatever promotions you do, if you can do that, even like, for instance, you have local papers where you live. Local papers love local people. And so if you contact them and you tell them, oh, you've done it. Okay.
Yeah, I've actually had my book signing down here, my book launch.
Okay.
And, for a new author, it's very tough to get 3 people. And I managed to get 30 people. Of course, once you get 30, you want more.
I know.
But yes, no, it's very timely because what I'm depicting is not racism or dislike for other people other than yourself. What it does, I think, is I'm showing, again, these people that come from these communities where they grew up in, and now they're thrust into either a ghetto or neighborhoods that they have never seen. So it's more of what they're not used to than being outright hateful towards anyone. Mm-hmm. It's how they deal with minorities and their culture. Sometimes it doesn't go right. But they tried. The police department at the time did really. The problem back then was there weren't many minority in the precinct that I describe in the book. There were not that many minority cops. So you had a high population of Asian, Middle Eastern. You had a Black community, a Spanish community, and you had a white community all meshed into one. Mm-hmm. And the cops really only knew how to not professionally, but they knew how to deal more exactly with their own type of people. Sure. So when they meshed with the others, it became a little conflicting. But like I said, the Asian community, especially, if you know anything about Queens, they really,
yes, I do.
They really came into that, and all these people wanted to do was work and
I know.
And go home. I didn't, I don't recall. There were any gangs, but they weren't prominent in that area. Mm-hmm. So you had to learn about the other cultures, and again, the problem was at that time the preference was to put. Let's say the CPOP unit had 10 cops in it, and they were filtered out in 10 different beats, which were big beats. You had to cover a mile or 2 miles, and they didn't have enough. They didn't have any at the time Asian policemen to put into their own communities, and there weren't many of the other minority groups either. So it was mostly, especially when they first implemented it, it was mostly white cops from the suburbs.
Yeah.
And so over time, they did, they tried to they transferred some different people into the precincts when they saw they needed to have someone to really be, and by nobody's fault, obviously it's more trustworthy if
more in tune with the culture.
Right, more in tune with the culture, and they would trust them more. They would be like, well, that's one of our own, and they mean well,
There's a lot in this book. What would you say your main message in this book is? What do you really want to get across? I mean, you may not have just one message, but what did you really want to get across?
My main message is to show that policemen have such a difficult life, and not to judge them based on what they might have grew up on as opposed to their real feelings. Because there is actually one policeman in the book who gets into a lot of trouble with the minority groups, but in his heart, and there's one scene, if I may describe it, in his heart, he's accused of racism, but when he sees an elderly Black woman get thrown under a bus, he climbs under that bus to help her. Because he really wanted to help her. So I think the main theme as far as the police work is that it's difficult on both sides. You know, I get it. You know, a lot of people don't want to trust a cop, and a lot of cops are suspicious of the community. And, you know, so I think my main theme is to, if these community police units come back, maybe more meetings, and they would, you know, have a connection, more of a connection. And it might be happening now, Linda, because I am retired 17 years. So I'm sure now, especially in neighborhoods like Bedford-Stuyvesant and New York City, I'm sure that they are working towards that. And so I guess my main theme is to not judge, just read the book. And you know, this is also a flashback to the 80s. So you're going to see about the hairstyles and the perfume that people wore back then. And
Our youth.
yeah. And so that was one of my themes. The other theme was mostly almost a stoic type of thing, is that when you're, especially with the male police officers, when they're leading down a path of self-destruction to try to bring themselves back.
Yeah, no, yeah, well, that's a struggle we all have, right? We all,
Right.
well, most of us anyway, reach points in our lives where we're losing ourselves.
Right.
To find that way back, we have to find a meaning to our life and a purpose to our life. And if you don't have a meaning and a purpose, and you're never thinking about that.
And you and I have talked about that privately, because, you know, I've told you I have went through a lot. And even though I'm not a best-selling author, I'm hoping that at least the writing is an avenue that is a purpose.
Yeah, I'm not a best-selling writer either. In fact, I know very few best-selling authors, but I know that I love my stories. I do get them out to kids. I get some very good reviews, which will bring us to the next thing. And you know, when it ceases to be enjoyable for me, writing a book, I find is not the easiest thing in the world. All of this is really a bit of hard work. And, but I must be getting something out. I love my stories. That's what it is. I don't think of myself as a writer. I think of myself as a storyteller. My last book is based on my experiences going through Catholic school, but it's fictionalized back into 1946. It's cute and it's funny, and I really enjoyed writing it. But speaking of reviews, I have some reviews, and I'd like to read them. The first one is a very well-written book, and it was reviewed. It's a 5-star review. And the book was great, in capital letters. It was very well written, very descriptive, and it put me in the front row of a year in the life of. The best compliment that I can give CPOP 1986 is that the way it was so skillfully written by its author, Vincent Casale, that it allowed me to watch this book as opposed to just reading this book. Make the purchase, you will not be disappointed. I like that. Watch it. If your book, the books I love to read are the ones that are like movies. And when I write, I see it as a movie. So that's a great compliment. Got another one. Beat Cop brings us back to the 1980s, styles and all. I won't give the book away, but there is an element without intention of stoicism.
Yeah, which is simply
Nicely done, Vincent.
which is simply stoicism is a philosophical practice like Buddhism and Taoism. And it's that you just have to enjoy your life, virtue, nature, and you have to let things go, or from any part of your past, even yesterday. You have to let it go or it'll eat you up alive.
I'll read the last one. A great read written by retired NYPD officer. Interesting, moving, and realistic. Recommended to book club too. And I was going to ask you to do an elevator pitch, which is 2 or 3 sentences to make a publisher publish your book, but that's it right there. So your reviews are good. Okay? So what's next, Vincent?
Next is going to be a tragic love story.
Romeo and Juliet.
Sort of. And I just want to amplify one more point that you, in the theme in the book, that once you see all these communities interreacting, I'm hoping that the communities that are not trustworthy of the police and the Asian community never like to report crimes or have you go to their house. I think it's so important.
Yes, it is definitely important. It's the answer to what's going on right now. Just turn on any cable news channel.
Yeah, and I thank you for letting me tell my.
Thanks for coming on, Vincent. Really,
I'm always nervous about these, and then when I start talking, I can't stop.
Also, I don't know if you're still a member of LIAG.
I am.
Okay, so you get the messages from Ann.
Yes.
Holtman.
About the Zoom meetings once a month?
Yeah, you should do the next one because it's a reporter from Newsday, and it's about, I'm sure, getting your book into the newspaper somehow. And any tip that we get to promote our books is worthwhile. Speak up. I think according to my clock, we're still talking, but I don't know. So best of luck to you in Florida. And of course, if you come back to New York, come to one of our meetings.
And I certainly will. I'm up there often. My mom is still around, thank God.
Sure. Yeah.
So I visit her. And I like to send you a copy.
Okay.
So,
all right. I'll email you my address.
Yes, and that'd be great because I've been on your show 3 times now. So.
Yeah, I know. You're one of my stars.
And,
or recidivists.
And I hope I explained my message a little bit.
You did.
But in the end, remember, there is a lot of shock value in it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think police. I think that's sometimes a problem for policemen because they see the seedy side of life all the time. And my feeling is they should be reassigned periodically to something that's less in your face.
And we have the most incredible dark sense of humor. But anyway, Linda, thank you very much.